Welcome to False Claims, Real Consequences.
Welcome to False Claims, Real Consequences. I'm John Clemens. I'm joined by Stephen Teller, a top-rated attorney who represents whistleblowers in federal fraud cases involving PPP abuse, retaliation, and financial deception. And today we're unpacking what really makes a Paycheck Protection Program case succeed and why it's not always about the flashy purchases. This is beyond the big purchase, what real PPP fraud looks like and how to win a whistleblower case. First of all, Steve, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. Happy to help.
Yeah, excellent. Well, let's dig into this. This is an important subject, so I'm happy we get to talk about it. So for starters, what does a strong PPP fraud case look like from a whistleblower perspective?
So you'll remember PPP was the Paycheck Protection Program where under the Biden administration, when COVID hit, the Small Business Administration gave out a lot of money to keep the economy moving when we were all stalled and, couldn't go to work because we were worried about, more people dying from COVID. And so they gave out a lot of money in they call it the first draw in early 2020, and the second draw was in early 2021, if I remember right. And, those were allowed to be used for specific things, interest on loans, payroll, rent, a few different things. And I got a series of calls about, hey, I know that my boss bought a new truck in the same time frame, so I think that we have a fraud case here. And most of the time, that's not going to make sense to go forward with, right? I mean, we really need to know more about the inner workings of the organization, right? If the person who's calling me is the accounting staff member or finance director, and they know that $1 million was misused. We paid down debt, or we bought a new machine or something like that. There's a possibility of a case. But even then, money is what we call fungible. In other words, $1 is the same as any other dollar, right? It's like a pound of rice is the same as a different pound of rice. So you can't really say, they put the money in this account and then they spent the money from that same account on the thing they weren't allowed to. But yeah, they did spend money from another account on payroll and interest and the things they were supposed to, and have a claim. We're not going to track which dollar is which. So there's a start to the answer.
So what kind of businesses were outright ineligible for PPP loans under the rules?
Yeah, so this is where we get interesting because there were types of businesses that just couldn't take loans, and they did. So if it was an illegal business, if it was, in other words, federally illegal, so sorry, marijuana companies, you weren't allowed to take out loans, and a fair number of them did, and some of those haven't been filed on yet. Private clubs and businesses that restricted membership for reasons other than capacity. So, the obvious is the men's club or the women's gym. They're not allowed to get a PPP loan unless they show that, in fact, they let men in, they just advertise to women. Or a private club that the golf and country club where you have to know somebody to get into it. That's probably a business that isn't allowed to get a loan. What did I say? Marijuana companies and think tanks, policy, influencers that way, political influence organizations weren't allowed either. Those are the ones I know off the top of my head.
Yeah, so you and I, we both live in the Seattle area. Obviously, there are a whole lot of pot shops around that have sprung up over the past, number of years. And according to the PPP rules, they can't get this loan, and yet some of them potentially did anyway. So how did they even get the loan in the first place?
Well, SBA was working very hard to get money out into the economy very quickly. And so they told the banks, lend this money. And the banks tried to give some guidance and often did. But if a company applied for a loan, I think the bank was for the most part entitled to think, yeah, they probably are eligible. And there just wasn't a heck of a lot of oversight. The point was to keep the economy going, not necessarily, only give out money to those. That takes too long to vet every single loan when you're trying to pass out that many loans. And so they relied on the applicants to read the rules and follow them. Maybe I don't think it's inherent in the nature of, marijuana companies in general. I think that, there's lots of people who don't read the rules very carefully, right? I get that thing from IKEA. I'm probably going to try to put it together without, reading the manual. But, if you're applying for a 7-figure loan or a high 6-figure loan, you probably, it's inherent in your duty to read the rules and be sure you're actually eligible for it.
Yeah. So then what's the follow-up then? You mentioned some of those cases potentially still haven't even been looked at. So, I mean, is the government going after some of these companies that took loans that shouldn't have, or how does that work?
They are. There's a huge backlog of that too, right? So False Claims Act cases, this is where you file with the federal government, and the Department of Justice looks at it. And there were previously, like 100 or 150 a year, and then there were 900, right? And then we've kind of got through the bulk of that super huge filing. A lot of those are PPP cases, if my sources are correct. And so a lot of people have already filed those cases. And if simply because you Google that marijuana company, pick on them for a while, and you can't find anything about them having to pay back the loan or about a lawsuit against them or anything, well, those False Claims Act cases are filed under seal. And it's taking the Department of Justice a fair amount of time because there's so many of them, and somebody's busy cutting government right now. So we're not able to quickly get all of the SBA money repaid. It's taking time. Did that answer the question? I think it did.
Yeah. I think it's just time and money, like everything, right? There's just not enough time in the day, so it just takes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so, a responsible company that realizes after the fact that they weren't entitled to that $700,000 or that $300,000 or that 1.2 million or whatever they took out because they have a big payroll, they got to figure out how to pay that back or turn themselves in, because it's, I think, highly likely to happen that they will be identified by somebody. There are people out there, looking through the records, trying to figure out which of these companies have taken out loans they weren't entitled to, and bringing those to the Department of Justice and the Small Business Administration for the reward.
Yeah. Oh, there's a reward?
Yeah.
Oh.
The False Claims Act pays whistleblowers for bringing information about fraud to the government.
Oh. Well,
yeah.
Medicare I think we talked about that in other episodes, but that's an important point.
Yeah. Yeah. PPP fraud, Medicare fraud, government procurement fraud, customs, with all these crazy tariffs. If somebody's ripping off the federal government one way or another, it's you can bring it, as your sort of, I don't know, patriotic duty. I mean, I think it makes sense to help us all out by saying, hey, boss, you can't do that. And if the boss says we're going to do it anyway somehow, or fires you for the opposition, well, let's bring it to the Department of Justice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to the beginning of this conversation. You mentioned, you fielded a call one day. Someone said, hey, my company took out a PPP loan, and then the owner bought a new truck. It's okay. I agree with you. That's kind of a flimsy argument. Like, the owner could have been planning to buy a truck for years. You don't know. So what kind of evidence actually helps establish a case? Is it emails? Is it internal documents? Like, what are we looking for exactly?
Well, a lot of what I'm doing right now has to do with they weren't eligible, like you mentioned before, right? So, companies that are local USA branch of a global company, weren't eligible for the second draw loans. And companies that had more than 300 employees weren't eligible for the second draw loans as a general rule. And there are a little bit complicated rules about who was eligible for those first draw loans. So those are the kind of the biggest and easiest cases to establish. Now, let's say a person's on the inside of a company and they know the details of what happened in this particular loan, and they know, where the money went. It didn't go for something appropriate. It wasn't for payroll because everyone was laid off right then because we weren't an essential business. Those are the kinds of details we need to establish that they weren't entitled to spend the loan on the wrong thing, or sometimes they'll falsify the number of employees or payroll data, but more often they just they weren't eligible in the first place.
Got it. Yeah, I would think that'd be pretty easy in certain cases, like it's the pot shops or the more than X number of employees. It seems like that's pretty cut and dry. So that's good to know. So what would you tell someone who's in that position of, hey, I think my company or a company I know about misrepresented itself to get one of these loans? What would you like? How do you proceed with that, knowing that information?
I mean, I think you kind of spend some time with Dr. Google on the internet, asking the questions and trying to get a pretty good sense that you're right. And if you're pretty sure you're right about it, you have a couple of choices. I mean, you can certainly call me. You can call somebody else who does either employment law or False Claims Act work and say, does this make sense to pursue? And I think you got to think about, if you're still employed there, what risk am I taking for my job? Even though we're filing it under seal, eventually it's probably going to come out, or they're going to guess it was me. Do I want to, move jobs for, a whistleblower reward amount? Do I want to, create that kind of turmoil in my life? I mean, those are relevant considerations. I think most of the time people will say yes to that, but I want them to pause for a second and think about the other consequences. Let's not just chase the money, but how's it going to impact your life? I think once you have a sense that, yep, indeed, there's a problem, you have the choice of going to the employer and saying, I think we messed up, right? And I think that when a person in good faith comes to their manager and says, I think we made a mistake and we have some legal liability, the manager's answer should not be, shut up and don't say anything.
Right.
The manager's answer should be, oh, let me look into it, and ideally, in the perfect world, they would, I think this is a good world. They explain why you're wrong. Nope. Here's why this was okay. Mm-hmm. Is that satisfactory? Want you to understand. If their answer is anything other than that, and it's sort of shutting you down, and I mean, okay, people are busy. It's hard to take the time to answer these questions, but this is an important question. So I guess I'm saying, you can go to your employer. I think it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer first, just to do some planning. But those are the options. You can file it in secret, and eventually it'll come out that you filed it. Or you can talk to your employer about, why don't we fix this?
Yeah.
And if they don't fix it, then you can still file it.
Right. I want to go back to the employer. This is probably the last question for the day. Is, let's assume we have a case where there's a business owner or an employer, and they took a PPP loan out, not realizing they weren't supposed to. We're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And someone brings it to their attention, and they say, oh, you're right. We did take that money and we shouldn't have. What's the next step for them?
They can turn it in. I mean, that is, the employer could say, oh, wow, we messed up. Let's fix it. Contact the Small Business Administration. I mean, and I would say, get your own lawyer, because I'm not that kind of lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the short answer is probably, you say to the Small Business Administration, we messed up. We owe you, $800,000. We can't pay it right now, or we can. Here's the check. Please don't make us pay double. And because that's the risk if their response instead is, well, let's just hope no one ever figures it out, and someone does figure it out, now they're going to pay probably double.
So there's definitely some there's some, there's some good reasons to come forward if you think you may have done that, again, even unintentionally, make it right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think I don't do a lot of criminal defense, right? There certainly are
Yeah.
times when the government is out to get somebody in this context. But I think for the most part, what I've seen is, when people mess up, if you can say, I messed up and own it and try to make it right, that's usually the best way to go. I mean, some things are too bad. You can't just say, I messed up. You kind of have to keep hiding it. But this is not one of those, I don't think.
Yeah, agreed. This has been a great conversation, Steve.
Yeah.
I know most of us probably want to forget all about COVID, but this is one subject that actually is important that we do need to keep on the top of mind. So I appreciate you coming on and just sharing with us about these loans.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to talk about. I find it super interesting. So it's just nice to educate people when I can. And thanks for asking.
Absolutely. And so to our listeners, if you've seen a company manipulate the rules, you might have a whistleblower case. Visit stellarlaw.com to speak with Steve, get the legal clarity you need. Again, check out our back catalog of podcast episodes to learn just a ton about the subject. And be sure to subscribe, like, share so we can get this information out to the people who need to hear it. And with that, we'll see you next time on False Claims, Real Consequences.
Right on. Thanks, John. See you guys.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.